Welcome back, fiends. I've just dug up a fresh terror for your listening displeasure. Tonight's story is about a young couple all dressed up for a party who take a little detour they'll regret for the rest of their, well, you'll see. Let's just say they find out that in some parts of the country, the locals are dead serious about their Halloween traditions. It's a tale that's a little corny. So turn down the lights, check under the bed, and prepare for a scarecrow. We call this one Field of Screams.
The air in the car tasted of stale pumpkin spice, air freshener, and cheap polyester. Wes shifted in the driver's seat, the wool of his sheep costume scratching at the back of his neck. It was a stupid costume. He knew it. Riley knew it. But her family's Halloween party had a theme, nursery rhymes. And Riley, bless her heart, had gone all in. She looked absurdly perfect as little Bo Peep, her shepherd's crook resting between their seats like a referee. "You're sure this is right?" Riley's voice was a small thing in the dark cab. She was looking at her phone, then at the absolute blackness beyond the windshield. "GPS says so," Wes said, trying for a reassuring tone that came out more like a grumble. "Interstate shut down for miles. Some big pileup. This is the scenic route, I guess." The scenic route was a dirt road that had forced him to slow to a crawl. On either side, endless rows of corn rose up like walls, their dry stalks whispering in the faint breeze. The headlights cut a weak, bouncing tunnel through the night, illuminating nothing but more dirt and more corn. The setting had all the charm of a grave. "Wes," Riley said, her voice tight. "Did you see that?" "See what?" He was busy trying to avoid a pothole the size of a small dog. "One of the scarecrows. I think it moved." He glanced to the side. The headlight beam swept across a line of them, posted every 50 feet or so. They were crude things. Tattered clothes stuffed with straw, burlap sacks for heads, their stick arms outstretched as if in a silent, eternal scream. They were just part of the local Halloween color, the kind of rural tradition the city folk found either charming or creepy. Wes was firmly in the creepy camp. "Don't start," he said, but a grin tugged at his lips. He saw the opportunity, a perfect little moment to needle her. It was a flaw in his character, that little spark of playful cruelty, but he loved the way she'd squeal and punch his arm. "It's probably just the wind, or maybe it's coming to get you, Bo Peep." "Don't, I'm serious." Her hand was a white-knuckled grip on the dashboard. That was all the encouragement he needed. Wes slowed the car to a stop, the engine ticking in the sudden silence. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "Just want to introduce myself to the neighbors," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. He pushed the car door open, the dome light painting the interior in a sickly yellow. "Bah," he said, giving her a sheepish grin. "Wes, get back in the car. This isn't funny." But he was already out, the damp, loamy smell of the earth filling his nostrils. The scent of the corn was thick and sweet, almost cloying, like honey left out to spoil. He approached the nearest scarecrow, the one she'd been looking at. It was a slumped, pathetic figure. "See?" he called back, his voice too loud in the quiet. "Nothing to be afraid of, just some old—" He trailed off. It wasn't the wind. The thing was moving. A subtle rhythmic squirming deep inside its straw-stuffed clothes. A muffled sound, like a sob, came from the burlap sack head. Wes's blood went cold. The playful moment shattered, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching dread. This was wrong. All wrong. His hand, trembling, reached for the sack. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then yanked it off. It wasn't straw underneath. It was a woman's face, pale and streaked with dirt and tears. A dirty rag was duct-taped into her mouth. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the night. He fumbled with the gag, his fingers clumsy. He pulled it free. The woman, who couldn't have been much older than himself, gasped for air, her breath coming in ragged, desperate sobs. They're gonna kill me," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. "Please, you have to help me." A scream ripped through the night. It was Riley. Wes spun around. In the split second he'd been focused on the woman, the world had changed. The road was no longer empty. The scarecrows were there, not on their posts, but surrounding the car. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like puppets with tangled strings. They were bashing in the car with wooden clubs and tire irons. The rhythmic thump crack of metal on metal echoing across the buildings. The windows spiderwebbed and collapsed. One of them drove a pitchfork into the front tire with a violent hiss. "Run!" Riley shrieked, scrambling out of the passenger side. The woman, Bella, she'd later gasp out her name, was already on her feet. Wes grabbed her arm, his mind a roaring blank, pure panic. The three of them plunged off the road and into the suffocating darkness of the cornfield. The stalks were elaborate, their dry leaves like razors against their skin. The rustling was deafening, a symphony that seemed to come from every direction at once, masking the sounds of their pursuers. They ran blindly, stumbling over uneven ground, the absurd fleece of Wes's costume catching on every stalk. Riley's Bo Peep dress tearing. They fell into a shallow ditch, the damp earth cold through their clothes. They lay there, panting, listening. Above the sound of their own frantic heartbeats, they heard voices. Two of the Scarecrow were passing nearby, their steps heavy. "Why'd they let her go?" one of them said, his voice a low, rural drawl. "Damn city folk, no respect." "They don't know," the other one replied. His voice was weary, resigned. "They don't know what they've done. The land requires its due on Hallows Eve. It always has. The old treaty. One soul to keep the ground quiet. One harvest for the Dark Lord." "The treaty was with the Harvest Lord," the first man spat, "but collecting the sacrifice will be them. The ones under the soil. The old ones. We built on their bones, planted on their graves. This whole dang valley is their boneyard. We give them a sacrifice at midnight, and they leave the town be for another year. It's the only way. It's the way it's always been. And now the ground is going to be angry. They were promised a fearful soul in a straw dress. We don't give them one, they'll take what they want." The voices faded, leaving Wes, Riley, and Bella in a silence more terrified than the noise. The horror wasn't random. It was a ritual, a grim yearly transaction with a malevolent entity. A custom where a scared sacrifice is hung like a scarecrow for some creatures from under the earth to collect. The farmers weren't monsters, they were keepers of a terrible peace. Their cruelty a desperate, pragmatic act of self-preservation. The true evil was older, deeper, rooted in the very land that they were hiding in. A land that remembered every injustice, every drop of blood spilled upon it. They stayed low, crawling on hands and knees through the roads, the sharp edges of the corn leaves slicing at their exposed skin. The rustling was a constant, maddening symphony that both hid them and masked the approach of their hunters. Every few yards they would freeze, listening. The first time the Scarecrows were so close, Wes could smell the stale sweat and burlap of their costumes. Two of them stopped just a row over, their heavy boots crunching on the dry soil. Wes clamped a hand over Riley's mouth, feeling her body tremble against his. He could see the profile of one of the burlap masks through the stalks, the grotesque eyeless face turning slowly from side to side. It seemed to stare right at them for an eternity. Wes's heart hammered against his ribs. A frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. Then, with a grunt, the figure moved on, its partner muttering something about checking the ditch by the road. They waited until the footsteps faded before moving again, a desperate scurrying crawl toward a dark shape they prayed was a barn. They had to get out of the open field, but panic makes you clumsy. Riley's shepherd's crook, which she'd somehow managed to hang on to, snagged on a thick stalk and snapped with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. "There!" a voice bellowed from their left. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, pinning them for a horrifying second. They scrambled to their feet and ran, all pretense of stealth gone. The corn was a blur, a prison of vertical bars. Behind them, they could hear the farmers crashing through the stalks, shouting to each other. Another light beam joined the first, sweeping wildly. Wes grabbed Riley's hand, pulling her along. Bella was a fleeting shadow ahead of them. A root snaked out of the ground and caught Wes's ankle, sending him sprawling. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him, his sheep costume digging into the dirt. The lights were getting closer. "Wes!" Riley screamed, turning back for him. "Go! Just go!" he gasped. But she was already there, trying to haul him up. Bella reappeared, her face a pale mask of fear. "This way!" she hissed, pointing toward a dense, dark patch where the corn grew thickest. Together, they dragged Wes into the tangle of stalks, just as the flashlight beam swept over the spot where he had fallen. They burrowed into the center of the thicket, collapsing into the damp earth. Their bodies pressed together. They could hear the farmers just feet away, their heavy breathing, their muttered curses as they searched the area. "Lost them. Dang it! They can't have gone far. Spread out. We gotta find them before midnight. The old ones will be looking for a scared scarecrow. We have to give them one." The voices and the lights moved away, continuing their sweep of the vast field. The three of them lay in the dirt, gasping for air, the adrenaline turning to a cold, heavy dread in their stomachs. He could feel the minutes ticking by, each one bringing them closer to midnight. And then it came. It started not with the sound, but with the absence of it. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind died. The cornstalks stood perfectly, unnervingly still. A low hum began to vibrate up through the soles of their shoes, a thrumming from deep within the earth. From their hiding place they saw it. The ground between the corn rows began to swell and darken, as if turning to black mud. Shapes began to rise from the soil and were ghosts in any recognizable sense. They were not human. They were horrifying, organic things, revenants of the earth itself, amalgamations of packed dirt, tangled roots, and black thorny vines that twisted into vaguely man-like forms. They were the land's vengeful immune system, awakened to purge a festering wound. They moved through the corn, sensing fear, and the stalks did not impede them. They simply passed through, the plants withering to black dust in their wake. The Scarecrow men saw them. Their shouts of alarm turned to screams of pure agony. A root, thick as a man's arm and tipped with a sharpened point of stone, burst from the ground and impelled one of the farmers, lifting him into the air. Another was simply dragged down, pulled into the soil as if it were quicksand, his terrified face the last to disappear. The sounds were wet and brutal, the tearing of flesh, the snapping of bone. It was Bella who saw the pattern. "The clothes," she hissed, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. "They're only taking the ones in the Scarecrow outfits." Wes looked at her, and now they're the ones who are scared. They sensed their fear. She was still wearing the tattered straw-stuffed shirt they put on her. A mark. A target. In a frenzy of desperation, they tore the sacrificial garments from her, ripping the burlap and flannel away until she was left shivering in a thin slip. They were shedding a disguise, an act that in older times was meant to fool the spirits, to hide the human from the supernatural. A shape of earth and thorn turned towards them, its featureless head cocked, as if listening to them. For a terrifying moment, it seemed to pause. Then, ignoring them, it glided on, seeking its marked prey. They scrambled away, crawling on their hands and knees until they stumbled into the skeletal frame of a dilapidated barn. They collapsed inside, the air thick with the smell of rotted hay and decay. Huddled in the splintered darkness, they listened. They listened to the final choked-off screams of the last farmer as the earth reclaimed him. Then, silence, a profound suffocating quiet that was heavier than any scream. The humming stopped. The night was still once more. They didn't move. They sat there in the dark, three strangers bound together by a nightmare. The physical threat was over, but the horror was now inside them, planted like a seed. Outside, the corn stood silent under the moon, waiting for the next harvest. The sun would rise, but for Wes, Riley, and Bella, the night would never truly end. They were survivors, but they knew, with a certainty that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, that they hadn't escaped. They had only been spared.
A grim reaping indeed. It seems those farmers learned a valuable lesson. When the earth asks for a sacrifice, you better give it one. They were just trying to keep the peace. Now they're just pieces. As for our survivors, they may have escaped with their lives, but they'll be carrying a bumper crop of trauma forever. Until next time, kiddies, may all your nightmares come true. Pleasant screams.